Hey guys, how's it going? Zan Barksdale of Catching-101 TV. Excited to bring you today's guest, which is the first episode of the 2021 series we got going. His name is Zac Stout. He's the catching coordinator at Rogue Baseball and Rogue Catching. He just spoke at the American Baseball Coaches Association. I've known him for the past couple of years online. We've actually had the chance to meet a couple times in person at Catcher-Con and also at the ABCA conference. But excited for him. He shares some awesome information online, has a great website that's devoted to catching where he shares really good articles and videos and information as well. So Zac, man, welcome to the show.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Zan. You know, it's a pretty big honor to be on here. I know I've been watching these, all the ones that you've been putting out, and I know some of my players have checked them out. So I think you're doing a good thing here, being able to share some catching content.
Well, thanks, man. I appreciate it. Honestly, you know, it's just fun for me. I get to sit and talk catching and pick people's brains. And honestly, selfishly, the reason that I kind of started doing this is just because it gave me an excuse to talk to more people and try to ask questions and try to learn more. So I use it to
Yeah,
try
I
to
followed your footsteps. That's the same reason I started sharing stuff too.
I think
So
there's
get
nothing
that feedback from other people.
Yeah, there's nothing better than doing that. So I'm excited to talk to you. I got a few topics I want to cover, you know, but definitely if you have anything interesting that you want to talk about, please feel free. Before we really dive into the content, though, I want to make sure that everybody knows where to find you. So this is where you get a chance to go ahead and plug your website and your social media profiles and all that sort of stuff. But let people at home or listening or watching know where they can find you and get more information from you.
Yeah, sure. So my Twitter handle's a little confusing, but it's @_ Zac Stout _. And I spell Zac a little weird. It's just ZAC. So it's _ZACSTOUT_.
Got to make it
I'm sure
complicated
you
for
can put
everybody.
that on the bottom or something. Yeah.
We'll do that. We'll
Yeah,
definitely
so
do
that's
that.
my Twitter. My DMs are open. So, you know, I do my best to try and answer everybody that reaches out with questions. And then I also run a website, learn.stoutcatching.com, where we do some online courses and have a discussion board, that kind of stuff, just to have a little better outreach with the catching community and just kind of get ideas out there.
Yeah, and a great website. You know, it's one of those that I've been to before, read the articles and gotten a lot of great info as well. So I don't feel like there are a ton of people out there that are actually writing articles. I don't write near as much as I used to, and that's one of my kind of goals for 21, if so to speak. I'd like to get back and doing more of that, but a lot of good resources. So definitely, if you're listening or watching and you've not been over there already, please go check that out. I guarantee you'll find some useful and interesting information over there. So. Zac, like I said, I definitely have a couple of things that I wanted to speak to you about, but, you know, it's in case somebody's listening way into the future, it's January of 2021. Recently, you just spoke at the ABCA clinic. What was your topic and what did you speak about? I didn't get to see it. I missed it and I apologize, but I'd love to kind of get a recap from you.
Yeah, so I was on the youth stage, so more focused at the younger catcher development. So it was tough to decide what I wanted to talk about. You know, there's so much in the catching world, and so many different areas that I like to dive into. But to me, one of the most important things to cover, especially for a convention for coaches, was kind of the skill acquisition side. So how we design practices, and how we can kind of change the training environment to best benefit the players, right? Just to get them to learn skills faster, retain those skills, right? And kind of build the characteristics that allow them to be successful, not just right now, but as they move throughout their careers.
That's interesting, you know, and I think I feel like a lot of coaching has kind of shifted in that direction over the past couple of years. And I think the shift is definitely still happening, but you know, we have people taking I hate to say a scientific approach, but it's more scientific approach to what you do. And it's more methodical approach than just showing up to practice and writing a practice schedule. So what would be a couple of the key highlights of maybe some of the main topics or main headlines of skill acquisition?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing for me is just this idea that there is no single correct or ideal way of doing anything, right? So there is no correct technique that's going to fit every single player. Every player is unique, whether it's their body build, their strength, their vision, any of those kind of things. And even within a single player, as they move through their career, they're going to grow, they're going to develop, they're going to change. So different movement solutions will work better for them at different times throughout their career. So really taking kind of this more open approach of how do I guide player development without having a strict this is right and this is wrong, really that black and white viewpoint. um, and really this all started, especially when some of the one knee stuff started going on and manipulating baseballs, right? Catching's changing a lot right now. And I was finding myself stuck where I was like, okay, well, how do I teach these things, because I've never did these as a player, right? And my whole approach to coaching up to that point had really been just pulling on past experiences and trying to translate in that some way in some way to get the players to understand and to replicate it basically. Um, so I was stuck in this kind of tough spot where I was like, okay, well, I can't do that because I never caught on one knee, right? I never manipulated pitches. I never tried to block out of one knee stances. Um, and how can I teach these to players and still be confident that, right, those skills are going to translate to games? So I that really led me down the path of diving into skill acquisition, a lot of the research going on in that area, and trying to develop a better practice environment for my guys.
I like that, and one of the things that I think a lot of coaches struggle with is so much has changed in the catching world over the past couple of years. And you can say the same for hitting or pitching. Pitching, it's the velocity training, or hitting might be the launch angle part of it. But for catching, it's the one knee stances, and it's the blocking and the throwing out of these different positions. And a lot of guys like me, I mean, I'm getting close to 40 years old. I was done playing 15 years ago. Nobody did that 15 years ago or before. So like you said, there's a learning curve, not only for the players who are trying to learn it, but there's a learning curve for the coaches who are trying to learn it as well. And that's why I respect guys like you and other guys that, really take what I consider the continuing education, very seriously. You talk to other guys, and whether it be in professional baseball or college baseball or the private sector, and you learn what other guys are doing. And luckily, the catching community is pretty cool. Everybody's open and willing to share ideas. But I think it's really important if we're trying to work with, high school guys, for example, that yeah, I didn't catch in a one knee stance growing up, so I don't have those experiences to draw from. So I've got to ask guys, talk to guys like you. Hey, what are you doing? What are you seeing? What are you learning? And other guys across the country as well. So that's one of the reasons I got a lot of respect for you, because I know you take it very seriously, and it shows in your work, and it shows in your appearance and what you do online and the information you put out. But that's a really good way to attack it, because I feel like there's that constant old school versus new school, battle or dialogue, so to speak. And like you said, there's not one particular right way to do things. There's a lot of different ways. But I really
Yeah.
appreciate when guys are really trying to, push the envelope and try new things. And I think that's something that we're starting to see a lot more of in the catching world. Thanks to partly guys like you.
Yeah, and we have such a huge responsibility with our athletes, whether you're working with youth guys or college guys, right? You know, I I think we're missing the boat if we're not taking what we're doing seriously and paying attention to the results that are coming out of the training, um, and just trying to do best by the players, right?
Yeah,
I think we all have good intentions, though.
absolutely.
Um,
Well, since you brought it up, I kind of want to get on that topic, and that's still. It seems like that's been the hot topic for the past year, or maybe year and a half now. And if I had to bet, it's probably going to be the hot topic until the electronic strike zone actually is implemented. But what are your thoughts? If you want to give a brief overview, then we can maybe dive, get a little bit deeper into the weeds. But what are your thoughts on the one knee setup and kind of the I don't know if new age catching is the right terminology, but some of the new stuff that we're seeing emerge. What do you think about that?
yeah, so I mean, I treat it as another tool in the toolbox for the guys. So we don't mandate anybody to catch a certain way. In fact, I bet if you watched most like my high school guys, you probably wouldn't know most of them work a lot of one knee stuff because they rarely use it in games with runners on. Now, part of that's because some of their coaches mandate they can't do it. But another part of it is just comfort level with them. and if they have that confidence to be able to handle balls in the dirt with runners on base. Um, but really, once I started playing around with it a lot more, it's become a fantastic training tool for the guys. Whether they use one knee stances in games or if they use traditional stances in games, right? It's a way to simplify what's going on with their body while we're working receiving or while we're working blocking, um, so that we can really isolate some areas and help them feel some stuff out. So it, to me, that's been the biggest impact of doing it is just from a training perspective, especially on the blocking side.
So and again, just to be clear, maybe for anybody that's listening, so even if a guy, let's say it is high school, they're not allowed to, or they don't do it, they haven't bought into it, whatever the reason, but they're going to catch from a traditional stance. You still like to use one knee stances as a drill, so to speak.
Yeah, if anything, the guys, that'd be like the more fundamental starting point is out of one knee stuff, and they'll progress to more of the traditional stances.
Okay, that's interesting. When you, and again, I know you work mainly with mostly high school guys and below. Is that fair?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so with those guys, when you're let's either converting somebody, or maybe not converting the right word, but maybe trying it out for the first time. What's kind of your starting point? Like, what do you do? Are you testing guys' mobility and see if they're able to do it, or do you kind of start them there and see where they're comfortable? How do you start a guy, who's not familiar with it?
Uh, Really just let them play around and find some stuff they're comfortable with. So we're always tweaking little things as we're going through. Receiving stuff is probably the main time they'd be working on a lot of stance things. Um, but if we're working on the receiving side, they're always encouraged to keep messing with their foot placements, messing with their body angles, their body tilt, all that kind of stuff, trying to find what works best for them. Um, and I haven't really found anybody yet that can't find at least somewhere in a one knee stance that they're comfortable with.
Mhm.
Um, the blocking side gets a little iffy sometimes with guys, especially with ankle mobility. But um, for me, it's all about just playing with it till we find something that works for them.
Yeah, so I would agree with that. Right now I work with I have a lot of guys that are different ages, but it seems like the people who are the most interested are the high school guys, and I think it's because they're seeing the guys in pro ball do it. They're seeing some of their favorite college players, do it and convert. And so I get a lot of questions, emails from parents or even from players, and they're like, "Hey, Zan, I want to try the one knee thing. Where do I start?" And a lot of times I give them kind of the exact same advice that you just gave is the first thing you got to do is you just got to play around with it a little bit. I mean, what's more comfortable for you? Is a kickstand more comfortable? Is the right knee down, left knee down? How do what are your contact supports on the ground like? I think I know it sounds very generic, like, hey, you just got to try it and see what works, but it is a super unique thing. And there's not, as new as it is, there's not a blueprint. There's not, hey, this is step one, this is how we teach this, and this is step two, we move on to
Right.
there, and now we move to step three next. There's a lot of individuality and a lot of wiggle room inside that. So I'm glad to know that I'm teaching some of the right things, and maybe the things that I'm telling guys are on board with what you're saying. But
Yeah.
that's an
Well,
interesting
and
topic.
I would argue the same thing holds true even for more traditional stances, right? There can be a ton of variability in how we set up in a traditional stance as well. So we always take the approach of, if we're working on receiving, the guys know, what their desired result is with receiving, and they're playing with a stance during that and just evaluating what gives them the best result. So through that process, they'll end up finding a stance they like, but we're not necessarily like focused on this is what you need to do stance wise. They're just
Sure.
kind of figuring it out as they go.
That
Yeah.
makes sense. So I've got another question, and I don't want to jump around too much because it's a similar topic, but it's related. Since you're in the private sector, d what's the I guess what I'm trying to ask is what's the relationship like between somebody that's working with you, and maybe we're trying that out, and a high school coach or a summer ball coach, which I know think you guys have a program out of your facility, so that may not be the best example, but I know, like you said before, there's a lot of guys who just they don't want to implement it. It's not their style. And hey, each coach that's That's their job to figure out what works best for them. And some guys have bought into it, some guys haven't. Do you ever get any pushback from a high school coach that's trying it, or how do you kind of balance that? I think that's just an interesting topic that a lot of people who are going to watch or listen to this might be, might be in the middle of, where they have a, again, I hate to keep using the term old school, but somebody who's just not really fully bought into the one knee stuff. But you see all of these guys online who are trying it and trying to work, and they want to start implementing it, but they get resistance, either from a summer coach or a high school coach or whoever it is. Is there anything or any situation you have that you can tell us about that's maybe relevant?
Well, I think first of all, it's important for especially younger players to be pretty versatile in what they're able to do. So I think in my training, I try to make sure that no athlete's coming out that can only catch in a one knee stance, right? He should be able to play with all these different stances and be pretty versatile and have a lot of knowledge about how his own body works and what works for him, so that he's equipped to have discussions with his coach about it. Um, I think every coach out there has good intentions for their players. They're not trying to do anything that's going to harm their players or give them worse results. So, usually, if a coach is asking a player to change his stance or go back to a more traditional stance, it's because something's not working. Um, so, I think just spending some time with the athletes so that they understand what's going on, they understand the results they need, and if they're not getting those results, then we need to find something else that will. Um, as far as like my relationship with coaches, I try to do a lot of outreach here in Colorado um, with all the coaches. I work directly with some of the high schools out here. I do consulting work, so um, you know I think it's important as coaches that we share our knowledge, right, and have conversations with other guys. That's how we all improve. Um, so I wouldn't say it's been a huge issue.
Yeah. I like to hear guys, different perspectives or different experiences with that, because, like I said, I get a lot of emails from parents all over the place, and it seems like that's what I've been getting a lot lately. Like, hey, coach, we want to try this, but there's pushback from the high school coach. What should we do? And I'm like, man, that's a tough conversation, because the guy who's making out the lineup card, who decides who plays and who doesn't play, ultimately you kind of have to do whatever he wants you to do. And
Yeah.
again, I'm with you. Performance a lot of times speaks louder than words. If you're hitting 450 in high school, guys aren't usually going to mess with your swing too much. So I think it kind of holds true receiving as well. But I had to ask. I always like hearing about that.
Yeah.
I definitely want to talk to you about one of the main things. So I think yesterday on Twitter, I sent out a tweet and let everybody know that I was having you on, and asked people what they wanted to hear you speak about. And I got a number of comments that kind of related to one of the articles that you put on your website not too long ago about the deception window and kind of the umpire's view. So if you don't mind, I would love for you to maybe give us a brief kind of overview or synopsis of the article that you wrote. And then we can maybe, like I said, dive in and get a little bit deeper and kind of attack a couple different, more specific things.
Sure. Yeah. So I first kind of started going down this path when we started seeing all this ball manipulation. We were seeing it was getting more strike calls, um, but it wasn't really clear what the important parts of moving the baseball were. So I was trying to teach this to guys, but I didn't know, what are the key aspects of this move that are important? Is it the movement itself? Is it the presentation of the pitch? We were seeing all these guys doing different things with how they're receiving the baseball at the major league level, um, and seeing good results out of different strategies. So I really wanted to try and dive in and find out, what are the key aspects of this that are leading to the higher strike rates. Um, and the first place my mind went was obviously the umpire, right? He's the guy that's making the call. Um, so I wanted to look at perception from the umpire's standpoint a little bit and see if maybe there was something going on there, that we could pull some keys for receiving out of. Um, so you mentioned the article on deception window. So the deception window is basically just a gap in time where the umpire's eyes aren't necessarily tracking the baseball anymore, right? So we have like a speed limit on our eyes of how fast they can move, and it's different for everybody. It's something that can be trained. It's called like dynamic visual acuity. If you really want to go look it up or do more research on the nerdy side, um, but right, so we have this speed limit basically on how fast our eyes can move, and at some point when we're tracking a pitch coming in, the baseball moves faster than that speed limit. So at some point, our eyes can't move fast enough to keep the baseball centered in our vision. Um, and it just so happens that for a lot of pitches that are either low or low outside or outside, right, that gap in the vision happens before the baseball arrives at the plate and the eyes move to the glove after we've already caught it. So we have kind of this period of time where we can move the glove without the umpire's eyes directly being able to see it. So I call that period of time the deception window.
Um, and so, and again, like I said, I've read the article, but I'll be honest, it has been a little while. I can sharpen up on it. How much time? I mean, I'm sure we're talking milliseconds here. How much time is the deception window, and how does that affect the catcher's move? I mean, does that mean just yank it as much as you can, or does that mean we need to, try to move it within that window of time and then and stick it? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so the length of time really varies based on a lot of factors. So I don't think you could ever predict what it would be, but I tend to say between like 100 and 200 milliseconds, um, especially for pitches like low outside. Right, the further away we get from the umpire's head, if he's sitting in the slot, that's kind of that sweet spot for the deception window. Um, so really, what it's telling us is, hey, if we maximize how much we're able to move that glove back into the zone during that time, we should theoretically get more strike calls out of him, or it'll at least make it more difficult for him to recognize where the pitch crossed the plate. So kind of the keys that I took out of it was, one, we need good glove path efficiency, meaning we're moving that glove in a straight line. It's taking an efficient path back to the strike zone. And then we need good velocity on that glove move. So we need to move it quickly. Um, but 100 milliseconds is a pretty small window. So we don't necessarily need a giant move, right? We just need to maximize the move within that window. Um, so I think that's why we can see some guys with smaller moves, that in that 6 to 8 inch range, still getting higher strike rates, as well as guys with the bigger moves in that 10 to 12 inch range.
Yeah, so I think I would tend to agree with that. When you're talking about the velocity of the glove, and I want to circle back around in a minute and talk about glove path efficiency. But before we get to that, I want to talk about the velocity of the glove or the speed of the movement. What are some things you do, or maybe a couple of drills or ideas, if you're a catcher that's watching this, or you're a coach that's watching this, how would you train someone to move the glove more quickly? Is it more complicated than just using resistance, plyo balls or bands, or what would be some of the things that you found that players like and seem to work?
Yeah. So what I tend to do is we'll get guys used to large glove manipulations first. So we do a lot of big exaggerated moves. Um, and they spend a good chunk of time doing that till they're pretty proficient at it. They're pretty consistent at it. It no longer feels like a big move. Um, and then we ask them to shorten the move up. So once they're used to these big moves and we say, okay, shorten the move up, feel like you're sticking it again, now they'll start getting that 6 to 8 inch move, but it happens a lot faster.
Yeah. I kind of like using that progression too, as a lot of times. In one of the analogies that I use is, the swing. If we're asking a guy to change something in his swing, sometimes we're asking him to make such a small change that it's really difficult to feel. So you say, hey, let's just go ahead and exaggerate. Let's really over exaggerate this thing. Let's make a big move so that you feel it, and then we can always kind of shorten it back up. But so I like that. Do you? Because I asked, do you do anything with weighted balls or resistance bands? Is that part of your program?
We'll do some weighted ball stuff. We don't do much with like plyo balls. Everything we do is out of a machine. So we'll do some variability drills with like the C25 balls, just getting some different weighted baseballs in there. We don't do that too often, but we'll use it some just for some variability on the impact force. If guys are really having trouble kind of feeling where their strength is at,
Yeah.
we'll do those. Yeah.
Okay. Now I kind of already cheated and I told you what I'm talking about next, but you mentioned glove path efficiency earlier, and it is relevant to kind of what we're talking about now. Um, I don't know if you coined that term or not. I always credit it to you because I think you're the first person I heard say it. But it's probably been, gosh, at least a year or two ago. You kind of started using some software and doing some really neat things, and actually tracking guys where there's a an objective measurement, how they're using their mitt. So if you don't
Yeah.
mind, kind of go in and just kind of tell everybody who's listening if they're not familiar with that term, what it means, and then we can kind of, like I said, get into a little more detail.
Yeah, sure. So I have a tutorial and stuff up on my website about it. So if you want, you can check that out. It has some good visuals and stuff, but it's basically a measurement of the path our glove takes after we catch the baseball. Um, so if that glove moves in a straight line, it's going to be more efficient, right? So it'd be 100% efficient if it's in a perfectly straight line. But if it starts to dip down, like we catch the baseball, glove goes down before up, right now that's a pretty inefficient path, right? So it gets a lower GPE score. So we're just comparing the total distance the glove moves after the catch to a straight line from where the ball hit it to where we presented it at.
And I know you use that with your guys a lot in your training facility, but are there any, pro guys or guys in the big leagues that you think do a phenomenal job of that you reference, or maybe you use as a teaching point if you have your guys ever watch video or you show guys an example? Is there anybody that, people can watch that maybe can learn from?
Howard, you could pick any top receiver you wanted to, and they all do a pretty good job at it. I think one of the cool things to look at with the pro guys is uh, they each have a different approach to getting there. So you take somebody like Barnhart who likes to finish more at extension on a lot of his pitches, at least if it's not like a inside pitch, right? He tends to finish more at extension. Um, and then you got guys that prefer to finish more in a flexion move, right? And everywhere in between. So I really, when I go through videos with my guys, we spend a lot of time just highlighting those differences. It's like, look, these guys all have really high GPE on these moves, but look at all the different ways that they're able to accomplish that. No two catchers do it the same way.
That's a really good point. Earlier we talked about kind of individuality some, and that's one thing I see a lot. If you're watching big league guys and you're trying to learn from them, I definitely think you can watch them and learn from them because like the guys you're talking about who do a phenomenal job with their glove, but they do things a lot differently. They attack things very differently. So it's kind of it's important to know as you watch, like, okay, this is what this guy does to have success, but that doesn't mean that's the only way to do it. I feel like a couple of years ago, a big conversation was, do you receive flexion to extension or extension to flexion? And
Yeah.
and that's kind of one of those things that I'm not going to say I don't teach it or I don't talk about it, but I feel like most guys are particularly better at one way or the other. And it's kind of like, let's just refine what you already do instead of, hey, we got to get you've got to catch flexion to extension or vice versa or whatever it is. But man, that's a good point. There's a lot of different ways to do things, especially when it comes to receiving. I mean, it's definitely more of an art than a science, it seems like right now.
Yeah, well, and even with the depth of the presentation, it changes based on the pitch location. So it is an area that we focus on quite a bit with the guys, letting them experiment and finding that depth. And something else I've been finding, the younger you go with catchers, the more they kind of need to be at that extension side, um, just to find that strength in their shoulder.
Mhm.
Uh, so
Do you prefer one or the other? I mean, if I had to put you on the spot, do you prefer flexion to extension or extension to flexion, or does it matter?
no, I don't have a preference. It's whatever's going to give the guy the best result. So we do spend a considerable amount of time playing with different depths, and the guys evaluate their results on it.
Yeah. I would say for me, it seems like you're exactly right. Definitely, different strokes for different folks. But I think most guys tend to be stronger at extension. And I feel like a lot of younger guys kind of pick that up a little bit easier than than trying to funnel it back in. Um, uh, again, not that everybody's the exact same, but if I had to put most younger guys in a category, like you said, they're going to be stronger at extension. So I feel like a lot of guys, I would start with that if you're trying to experiment between the two. Definitely, like you said, put in the reps, set up your machine, receive, put it on video, watch yourself, and evaluate. But personally, I feel like most guys that I've noticed do a better job at extension.
Yeah. Yeah. And, to me, I think there's pros and cons to each one.
Hmm.
Um, more at the extension side, you're able to build a little bit more momentum going at the baseball. So I think you can feel a lot stronger that way. But the downside of it is I feel you have to be a lot more accurate with the timing of the glove. Whereas more of a flexion move maybe takes a little bit more shoulder strength to maintain control of it, but it's a lot more forgiving on the timing. You can be pretty early and still have a good vertical move out of it with a flexion move. So,
Yeah.
like everything, there's pros and cons to it, and it's finding that balance with each athlete.
And honestly, the timing of it, that seems to be what most guys, I don't know if I want to say struggle with, but that's what takes a little bit longer to catch on. And it's not the actual move, it's the timing of the move. It's being able to time the ball as it's crossing the strike zone and lift it in one swift, a one piece movement, so to speak, with a good or efficient glove path efficiency. But yeah, the timing takes work, but earlier you kind of mentioned you like to do a lot of machine receiving, I think. Do you like do like high velocity stuff, medium velocity? I mean, a mix of both
Yeah.
or what?
So, I tend to think of practice in like two phases. We have kind of a experimental phase, which is probably the machine slowed down a little bit, more of a comfort zone where guys feel okay failing.
Mhm.
So we definitely don't want the machine so fast that they're worried if they miss it, it's going to injure them. So that might be the phase where we have the machine slowed down a little bit. And then we have kind of our challenge variability phase where we're at a minimum game speed and game variability, if not faster than game speed. So we spend kind of that experimental phase trying out new ideas. So, like we were talking, finishing extension versus flexion, that'd be the phase where we're playing with all those different depths of the catch, and the guys are trying to figure out what they like. They're watching videos of themselves, trying to see if it's the result they want or not.
Mhm.
And the moment they find something that they do like, so say they like finishing a little bit more on the extension side, we're immediately going to jump them into the challenge variability phase, crank the machine up to game speed, and start trying to attack the zone and find where there's a weakness in their movement. And then the moment we find a weakness in it, we go back to the experimental and attack that area and let them experiment again and find something new.
I like that, and so again, forgive me for jumping around a little bit, but after speaking to you a little bit and kind of knowing how you do things, I think there's some things that you do that a lot of people can learn from, and I want to talk about as many of them as possible. But when you're doing these drills or when you're going over this work with your guys, one of the things that I know and I've seen in your facilities, you have a pretty cool. You like tech as much as I do. Like I know you like the gizmos and the gadgets and the cameras. One of the things you do is you have a video delay set up to where guys can actually watch a rep. You know, basically they receive a pitch and they can look over the screen that's on a 3 or 5 or whatever second delay, and they can look at it so that they're getting instant feedback from you, and then they can actually see what they did or see what you're talking about. That's something that I think is like. I hate to use the word next level because I feel like that's a
Game
Twitter.
changing. Let's call
Yeah,
it game changing.
it's game changer. It's next level. But it is. It's one of those things that I feel like, man, that's a really cool, innovative idea, and that's the way training is going. So I know I gave it the simple rundown, but would you please go over that in a little bit more detail? Because I'm sure there are going to be coaches listening to this, and they're going to be like, "Holy crap, I've never heard of that!" But that's a phenomenal idea.
Yeah.
Whether it be swinging or catching or in the bullpen or whatever it is. I think a lot of people can benefit from kind of hearing how you set that up and how you use it.
Yeah, sure. So the original idea behind it was I really wanted to build ownership in the players. I wanted them to be in charge of every decision they made with their development. Um, and the one hurdle I couldn't get over is they could never see themselves to gauge their own results. So if we're receiving, they had to rely on me to tell them whether it was a good catch or a bad catch. So I wanted a way to remove that from me so they could make the decision on their own. So I found this free program, well, free if you're on Windows, Canovia. Um, so that allows us to do a delayed video feed. Um, so I just took a laptop that I already had, put Canovia on it, and we put the delayed video feed right there. Um, we've used it where I just put it on a tripod where the guys can see it, and I use the camera that's built into the laptop. Or we have TVs in our facility, so a lot of the times we'll cast it onto one of the TVs. And I know Apple has some apps for it. The other guys in our facility use a lot of Apple stuff. I don't remember what it's called, but I'm sure you can look it up on the App Store.
Yeah, I know there's an app store. I know there's an app. I think it's just called Video Delay that guys can use with an
Yeah, it could
iPad.
be.
And you know, again, you can set your iPad up and you can hook a HDMI or a USB-C to HDMI out and put it on a TV if you want, or you could just have the iPad set up where guys can watch it. But it's things like that that I feel like that's really thinking outside the box. And then I would imagine your players probably love that. That's probably one of those things that if you took that away, I would think the players are like, holy crap, like I gotta have that. Like that's an essential part of my
Yeah.
training.
Well, and it gives you really good insight into what they're thinking. So something I started doing with the real young guys, um, is I have them give me a after they catch a pitch, they look at the video, they're trying to decide if it's good or bad, and they give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if they thought it was a good catch or a bad catch. Um, so I really try to use it as this tool to get better insight into what's going on in their heads, because especially with younger guys, they aren't always great communicators, and they don't want to displease you. So a lot of times with the language we use, we can be like leading them in a direction, and they're just going to follow along and agree with you. So it can be difficult sometimes to figure out what they're thinking. So the video feed has been a great tool for that.
A game changer, so to
A
speak.
game changer.
Next level training. So no, that's good. I do like that. And it's funny you mentioned like the thumbs up or thumbs down. That's something that I've kind of done with guys for a while. I remember I'm going to date myself here, but when I was in college, we had like one camcorder and each player had a videotape, you know, one of those little mini, not a VHS, but like a mini VHS tape. And you'd film yourself swinging. And after you know, if you had a good swing, you'd give a thumbs up. And if a medium swing, you do this. And if you didn't like it, so when you go back and watch your video, I know that seems like super cheesy, but for guys who are videoing themselves and you're by yourself, if you just have your iPhone set up or your iPad or whatever it is, and you want to go back, you know, you can look and say, "Oh crap, man, that wasn't as good as I thought it was," or "Ah, man, I thought it was okay, but yeah, it looked pretty good once I went back and reviewed it." I'm a huge believer in using video. Like I said, I love the delay. I think guys should have you know, a library of themselves throwing and blocking and receiving. You know, they can always go back and reference. So I'm a big fan of anything like that, and especially when you do something that players love and players, you know, for lack of a better word, buy into it. Man, that's what coaching is. You know, it's we got to adapt. You know, I know sometimes we get in the iPhone era and social media and that sort of stuff, but the guys we're coaching are, you know, anywhere between 12 and 22 years old for most of the people listening to this. And if they communicate in social media and they communicate through text and short answer and emoji, that's the way we got to communicate, you know? So I'm big about getting on board with what they do and how they talk and how they communicate. So I like that. Now we have spoken mostly about, you know, receiving so far. And it seems like throwing kind of gets pushed to the back burner a little bit over the past couple of years. And you know, blocking is blocking. But what are kind of some of your thoughts about, you know, receiving and blocking and doing some of the other skills, you know, from a knee or from some of the newer, you know, non-traditional stances? What would you teach guys, or what would be some of maybe the talking? I know it's very individual, but what might be some of the talking points, or where would that conversation start with some of those guys who are trying to get into that?
Yeah. So blocking, you're probably gonna think I'm crazy because I'm like way on the other side with blocking. um, but kind of the traditional approach to blocking has always been like this form block, right? We get both knees on the ground, you know, the chest is over our knees, the gloves buried between our knees. Um, and I'm not a huge fan of that anymore. And my mindset kind of shifted with a lot of the one knee stuff, just seeing guys working out of this one knee stuff. Um, and really the driving factor between me kind of shifting my approach is we never see guys get in a form block in live games, whether it's high school or professional baseball, right? If we take video of them and pause at the moment the baseball's hitting them, they're in the transition to that stance, right? When the baseball hits them. Um, so to me, the most important part of blocking is that transition, right? Of moving to get a chest behind the baseball. I'm not a big believer that the knees play any role in the block, whether you get one knee down, two knees down, or no knees on the ground, right? As long as we can get that our body behind the baseball, um, we have a good shot of making a good block. So kind of my teaching points for guys is we'll start them out with some one knee stuff just to kind of break down um, this idea of a traditional form block and having to get to that position. Um, but really, we're trying to promote good glove action. We want them to feel active throughout the entire block. So I'm not a big fan of the phrase "be a wall" because to me, being a wall means we're getting down early and we're waiting for that baseball. I'd rather be moving and meet that baseball. Um, so we do a ton of one knee stuff just to get guys feeling different movements, um, and really how can we make that decision to block as late as possible. um, if I can see 99% of the ball flight before I have to transition to make a block, um, I know I'm going to be a much better receiver because I can think receive much longer. But it also lets me see more ball flight to be more accurate when I do move to block. So we're no longer guessing really early in the ball flight. We're able to react really late.
I think, that's an interesting concept. And I would say I'm trying to get on board with that. I'm somewhere in between. It's kind of like receiving from one knee stance. I feel like I was one of the late adopters. I wasn't in the first wave of people doing it because I kind of wanted to see how it played out. I was like, well, let me see when I can get some statistics. I want to see if it works. And then as I start getting more and more evidence that, okay, there's something to this, then I kind of started to buy into it. And I would say I'm kind of in the same phase, blocking. First of all, I definitely agree with you. I don't think you can argue that if you freeze frame a video of guys blocking, sure they are usually not in the picture perfect blocking position. It's usually in some sort of transitional phase. So I understand
Right.
that. Um, I guess if I had to ask, what would be the either teaching points or drills, well, before you answer that, let me say this. I do think that, in baseball and in sports, a lot of people talk about the process a lot. It's all about the process. It's not about the results. It's about the process and the journey and this and that. And I think in a lot of areas that may hold true, but for me, blocking is not about the process. Like, I don't care what your form looks like. It's about the end result, and if you can
Yeah.
keep the ball in front of you, I don't care if you're on one knee, if you're standing on your head, if you do a cartwheel, if you can square the ball up in the center of your chest protector or your belly button or whatever you want to call it, and you can control the baseball after it hits impacts your body, then we've done our job. So with that said, if we're not if we don't have one specific position that we teach guys to get in, how do you how does your coaching kind of revolve around that? Like, do you just like do whatever as long as you square it up? Is it more about being athletic? Is it more about having a late reaction? Like, what are kind of some of the things that we use to start teaching guys to go that direction?
Yeah. So I think the biggest key is being able to make a late move to block.
Hmm.
Um, so probably 90% of our blocking work all revolves around trying to build that. So I use ATEC Hyperlight balls. They're just these little foam balls that you can shoot out of a machine, um, but they're outrageously expensive. But they're the only foam ball I've found that I can get to fly like a baseball out of a machine. So we can crank the velo. We can get guys doing read react drills at 90 miles an hour with these little foam balls. So we remove the injury risk and kind of that fear factor of injury. but we still have the speed. Um, and the biggest benefit is, right, if we're doing 90-mile-an-hour fastballs and we're mixing strikes and balls in the dirt, right, that old traditional style of block isn't going to work for the guys, right? It's not a fast enough move for them to be successful at these high speeds. Okay, so it really encourages them to try and find a new way of moving that will let them be successful on that block, but still catch the ball when it's in the air. Um, so that's probably the main chunk of our training is just read react drills at game speed or above game speed with some of the foam balls. Um, Now, some guys will have a little trouble figuring out how to move, um, especially out of the traditional stances, um, because it can be a little different than what they were trying to do out of um, kind of that form block. So we'll throw some bands on them and yank them around, just pulling them to the side. I love the assisted band, so pulling them with the move to the side. Um, because it forces them to figure out how to stay balanced and controlled with this large move. And the idea is we want them to feel like they're sliding. We want them to feel under control. Um, and it allows them to kind of figure out where their hips need to go, where their strength's coming from in their legs, how to organize their body to stay controlled as they move. Um, and really, we've seen that carry over pretty well into the read react drills. Um,
Just so I make sure, and I want to make sure everybody listening understands as well. So when you say read react, that means we're not going, hey, we're blocking 10 to arm side, we're blocking 10 to glove side. That means there's a mix. Some are in the air, some are in the dirt. They have to actually read it and react.
Yeah, yeah, and I would say the majority of the pitches are in the air. Um, the goal is to try and lull them into that receiving mindset, and then give them one in the dirt,
So
right,
similar
and
to
see if they can figure out a way to block it.
Yeah, it's similar to a game. I mean, in a game, you're going to receive way more
Yeah,
pitches in the air. And again, we like to think we have an idea when we put down two, three, or four fingers that it might be in the dirt. But at the end of the day, I mean, we don't know. We have to read and react to it. So that's pretty good. So what would be a couple of the other cues? Are you telling guys to catch it in the middle of their stomach or try to control it? Do you work with them much on where the ball goes after the block, as far as, hey, try to block it to where you can retrieve it quickly, or are you trying to block it to your arm side? What do you kind of do with all that?
I mean, they're all trying to get it to die right in front of them, right?
Yeah.
Either keep it in the glove or get it to die right in front of you. Um, but probably the main cue we give them is just trying to get them in that receiving mindset. So
Yeah.
it, getting them away from trying to guess whether it's a strike or a ball in the dirt. Um, so we'll tell them, hey, it's going to be a strike. It's going to be a strike. It's going to be a strike, and then throw one in the dirt.
Yeah.
And then sometimes we'll also tell them just to wait, right? Let that baseball get like an inch away from your glove before you decide you're actually going to commit to the block.
Yeah. I like that, and I can get on board with that. I saw a video on Twitter the other day, and I wish I could remember who posted it so I could give them credit. But they basically had cones set up in front of home plate, and they would have their catcher try to block the ball and try to direct it towards either a particular cone or a particular gate or window in between cones. And I thought it was interesting, not because we're trying to ever block the ball to the third base side, or we're trying to block it to the first base side. Ideally, we want it to block it to where it ends up as close to us as possible. But I thought it was a really great tool for teaching catchers how to control their body, how to manipulate their body to get if I can manipulate it to where I can block it to the first base side or the third base side. I would like to think I'm much better equipped to be able to block it and have it die right in front of me. So that was something I saw the other day, and like I said, I wish I could remember who posted it to give them credit. But that was an interesting drill. Things like that are things that I don't think many guys did. In the not too distant past. So I love seeing guys think outside the box and do things like that. So that's interesting. As far as the throwing side of it, we kind of talked about blocking a little bit, and we spent a lot of time about receiving. What do you guys do, throwing wise? Is there anything you're teaching your guys that might be a little bit different, or, what are some of your favorite drills? I'd kind of just love to know what your approach to that is.
Yeah, so I'm lucky enough on the throwing side. We have some pretty great pitching guys in our facility, so I don't have to do much with the guys on like throwing mechanics, throwing
Mhm.
velo, that kind of stuff. Any of the arm strengthening programs, all of that's handled by the pitching guys, who are way smarter about throwing than I am. So with the catchers, really the only side I'm dealing with is, you know, their transfer, their footwork, that kind of stuff. And my goal is just to find a way for them to get in their best throwing position. You know, I I think the most important part of our throws is accuracy. Um, it doesn't really matter what our pop time is, what our transfer time is. If it's not close to the second baseman or the shortstop, it's useless, right? If he can't put a tag down, then it's meaningless. So, um, to me, I think our number one goal is to get into our best throwing position. Um, so we work with our guys a lot on just trying to figure out what that is, kind of some movement sequences that allow them to get there and feel nice and strong with their throws. Um, so one of my favorites is, we call it the turning two drill, but we just throw a bag out there and the guys get to be like a middle infielder. So we give them a real slow, big hop and gives them plenty of time to just try and organize their body, catch it, and come through for a throw. Um, so just trying to let them figure out how their body likes to be positioned to, one, catch the baseball and transition for a throw. Um, and then we try and move that feeling into what we have behind the plate. Um, so really that feeling of being nice and smooth, letting the feet find where they naturally want to go, so that we can be strong in our foundation, have a nice, strong, repeatable throw.
Yeah, I like that. And I want to circle back to one of the first things you started talking about, you know, kind of letting the pitching guys do it. You know, I know we say it kind of jokingly, but man, I did that for a long time too. And when it came to throwing, the pitching guys were way ahead of the position players for a long time, and they probably still are, or they probably, you know, will continue to, because that's what they do. That's all they focus on is just throwing. So you know, when I really started to dive and get deep into it, I was reading every information, watching every video can from all the pitching guys out there, learning what they're doing to create, you know, arm speed and velocity. How do they use weighted balls? How do they use bands? What do they do for this? What do they do for that? But at the end of the day, I think that, you know, a lot of times we can keep our ego in check, and instead of just saying, "Hey, I know everything about this. I've been doing this for a long time." You know, reach out to guys that you can learn from. You know, the pitching guys, they want to have good catchers behind the plate, you know, and they are usually more than willing to share and talk. But I'm with you. Those guys, they've been on the cutting edge, and if we can, you know, use some of the same principles or programs with catchers that we use with pitchers to build arm strength, so to speak, I think that's a good thing. Now, there's definitely some differences. You know, we're under a different time constraint than they are, but a lot of the same principles still hold true, whether it be with your long toss program or your weighted balls, or your plyos, or whatever arm type, you know, whatever type of arm care that you do or you prefer. You know, that's fine. I think there's a lot of different ways to skin a cat, so to speak. But I'm with you. You know, if you're watching this and you're unfamiliar with what to do, and you don't have a great catching guy or a great throwing guy, man, reach out to a pitching guy. I have no ego in that. I will talk to any pitching guy out there that, if they can help me get a catchers to, you know, have more velocity on their throw or throw more accurately, man, I'm all for that. And like you said, I feel like accuracy is, of the three, of the quickness, the arm strength, and the accuracy, really the three things that we have control over. I feel like accuracy is, probably the least taught, and maybe there's good reason for that. I don't know. But are there any drills or anything you do to help guys improve their accuracy? Any type programs? I mean, I'm a firm believer in, one, talking about it frequently and often is important. But are there anything you like to do with your guys to, you know, help set them up to be, you know, more accurate throwers?
Um, you know, that I definitely think throwing's my weakest area, so I don't think I have anything groundbreaking on the throwing side.
That's all right. That's okay.
But accuracy's been something that I struggle with for a long time because I'm always indoors in cages. Um, so it's been a struggle to try and find a way that reinforces that accuracy is a big part of it. Um, but we were lucky enough, we got a hit tracks in our facility now, so we've started using that to at least give them some feedback on where their throw's going. Um, but for the most part, it's a lot on the players to just try and identify when they feel like they're getting in their best throwing position
Mhm.
versus when they feel like something was off.
Yeah. I would say with the guys that I've worked with, you know, I think the first step is just being aware of it and being accountable to it. I think a lot of guys, whether they're getting loose before practice or a game, they're usually throwing and having a conversation at the same time. They're talking about the algebra test. They're talking about, the prettiest girl in the class, or they're talking about the video games or whatever it was. And I think just being number one, being present and picking out a small target on your partner and trying to throw can go a long way. I'm not in the college game anymore, but when I was still a college recruiter, when you go and watch a high school game, before the game when guys are getting loose, when it's just a constant, run to the chain link fence and pick it up and then chunk it over my partner's head. You see a lot more of that than you would expect. So I think for me, the first thing is, first of all, let's be aware of it. When you're throwing, this is throwing. This is not time to talk about algebra. This is not time to talk about video games or movies or whatever. Let's make that our focus. So I'm with you on that. Now, but because you're into all this stuff, you got the hit tracks, you got the tools, you got the video delays. Like I said, I could talk about the techie side of it all day long, just because I think it's cool and I enjoy it and I think it helps players. But what are some of the next things? Do you have any plans for anything else that you'd like to implement, or anything you've seen that you might be trying in your facility or working with your guys?
Yeah, I do have some stuff I'm working on. I'm not quite ready to announce it yet, but
Okay.
there is some stuff in the works. Um, it's probably a year or 2 years out, but
Well,
you know,
I want
I
to get the exclusive interview. Now, when this finally comes out in a year or 2 years, you got to come back to me first, and
yeah,
we're gonna
yeah,
break it.
we can do that. We can do that. But catching always seems to get neglected from a lot of the tech side. Um, and I mean, I get it; it's a smaller market, um, but really, we don't have any great way of measuring some of the results.
Mhm.
And to me, that's the biggest part of tech, is having this unbiased measurement of the result you're trying to get, because that can really help us in the training environment as we experiment with different things, to have some way of evaluating, well, did that experiment work? Was that better or worse than the other thing I tried?
Yeah.
Um, so, I've always been searching for some of that stuff to try and help out. So using the hit track, some of the video delay feed, all of it's kind of been guided in that, with that mindset of trying to give a little bit more clarity to what's going on and what that result was that you just got. So you can get some of that transitional feedback while you're experimenting.
Yeah. Well, maybe we can talk off the air sometime and you can give me some of your inside info, because I am 100% with you. And I feel like that's one of the biggest disconnects between professional baseball and amateur baseball. You see the catchers, receiving metrics or their framing metrics. And what a lot of people don't understand is, in the big leagues and even in the minor leagues, they have a TrackMan or a Hawkeye, one of these programs that with a very high degree of accuracy can track the XY coordinates of the ball, where we receive it, and then the outcome. But there's not a high school in the country that has that technology, and probably won't for quite a while, just because of the cost. So when you look and you see, oh man, Wilson Contreras went from 46th receiver to the 6th receiver in the MLB, oh, we got to do exactly what he's doing. If you're a high school kid, you might not necessarily get away with the exact same moves that he's making. Maybe you need, Barnhart's a little bit different. Maybe you need to use a different style, but there is no objective way to measure the receiving metrics at the younger levels. Again, the umpire strike zones are going to be different. The pitchers aren't going to pitch with as much accuracy or precision, and then there's no real way to measure it other than just the eye test. And I think for me, I think one thing we've kind of had to buy into is the eye test can be deceiving. A couple of years ago, when
Yeah.
when Tyler Flowers started catching on a knee and yanking the ball up through the zone, that failed the eye test miserably. I think every old school catching guy would agree that that looked awful. but I'll be damned. I mean, it worked. Like, he was getting a lot of strikes. So that's where I think it's tough with some of the younger guys. Just because it looks bad, that doesn't necessarily mean it is bad. Just because it looks good doesn't necessarily mean it is good. There's a lot of gray area in between. So I'm definitely going to continue to keep up with what you're doing, and hopefully something like that, eventually gets passed on and moved down the line. And like I said earlier, we'll see what happens with the electronic strike zone. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. I might as well get them while we're here and talking about it.
Yeah. Oh, who knows? I think it'll definitely represent a big change for the sport.
Yeah.
If anything, it'll have a renewed demand on at least the catching coordinators and the catching instructors at the MLB level to figure out, how can we transition all these big bats into the catching position, or how can we make you still a valuable asset behind the plate without the receiving piece. So I think it'll still be pretty fun to watch at the MLB level how they adjust to that. But I think my concern is what that does to catching at the youth levels, right? Is there going to be much focus or desire from young catchers to want to be a catcher or want to work on their receiving side that much?
Yeah, I tend to agree with you. I think the negative, and I wouldn't say I'm necessarily, pro electronic strike zone or anti strike zone. I just think it's coming. So my mentality is like, it's going to happen at that level. Those guys might as well get on board with it. My concern is kind of the trickle down effect, like you're speaking of. I think it seems like a lot of things are happening at the big league level first, and then now we're kind of adopting them, in the college game and in the high school game and in the amateur game. And if they have an electronic strike zone at the big league level, what those guys are doing is going to be very different than what a high school catcher or a college catcher needs to do to have success, because the game is being played two very different ways. So I'll be curious to see kind of how that affects the amateur level and what happens. That's just that whole chain of events and everything involved with it.
Yeah. I try to be an optimist. It'll at least be interesting and engaging.
Yeah. Well, I feel like a lot of people kind of got mad at me when I didn't come out, with swords and flames, to protest the electronic strike zone. It's definitely going to change things. And my thought is that they're toying with it. I think the technology is getting much, much better and getting much more accurate every single year. So I would imagine, before too long, it's probably going to be at the big league level, and maybe it'll stick around, maybe it won't. I guess time will tell. But it's coming for those guys, so you might as well prepare for it instead of just sit around and complain about it.
Yeah.
So, Zac, man, this has been awesome. I just looked at my clock and I didn't realize we've been on here for an hour already. So I'm probably going to go ahead and wrap this thing up in just a minute, but definitely appreciate having you on. So far of all the guests, not to knock anybody else, you have the best camera and studio setup of anybody. So you got the HD picture and the nice microphone. I'm going to make that a requirement for everybody else who comes on after that. I'm going to make them watch this episode, but no, man, I appreciate it. And like I said, I'm going to link to your website and your social media again, but one more time, just for everybody who's listening, please feel free to tell them where they can find you, or maybe if a parent wants to reach out and contact you about a lesson or remote instruction, just where people can find you and what all you do.
Yeah, sure. So my site for lessons and that kind of stuff is stoutcatching.com. If you're not in Colorado and you just want to learn about catching, my site learn.stoutcatching.com has all of my online courses. We have a discussion board filled with tons of catching coaches where you can just kind of share ideas. That's also where I post all of my blog posts, and some of the other catching guys in the community post their ideas on there as well. But yeah, I love talking catching, so don't be afraid to reach out with questions and just chat with me. Even on Twitter, my DMs are open, so feel free to reach out that way as well.
Well, I hope a lot of people do reach out. I'm definitely going to reach out again and continue this conversation at some point, because, like I said, an hour flew by. But I don't want to make this the marathon podcast. So, Zac, man, appreciate it as always. Enjoyed talking with you, and I hope a lot of people follow up with you and get some more info. And keep, you're doing a great job, man. You're spreading the word of catching. You're on the cutting edge. You're definitely thinking outside the box, which I appreciate. So keep up the good work, man. I love what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Zan. Like I said at the beginning, I love this little podcast series you're doing, and I think it's really helpful to not just other coaches but to players as well.
Well, selfishly, I think I learned more from it than anybody else, but I'm going to continue to do it for everybody's sake. So, but I appreciate you saying that, and we'll definitely have to talk again soon.
For sure.
Thanks, man.